As we went along through this challenge, it became clear to me sheep have provided life to us for thousands of years. How do you say it doesn't matter anymore? How do you say what we've been given, the gifts of creation, don't matter anymore?
Welcome to Leaders of the West, a podcast for innovators and changemakers. I'm your host, Jessie Jarvis, the founder of the West, and I'm sitting down with agriculturalists, entrepreneurs, executives, and everyone in between with the goal of digging into the strategies, mindsets, and lessons that have been crucial to the success of ag and Western. Whether you're carrying on the next generation of your family's operation, starting something from scratch, or determined to climb up the leadership ladder, we're going to inspire you to continue to dream big, growing not just you, but the future of agriculture and Western as a whole. Let's go. I have something that I want to share with you guys that I don't talk about a whole lot, and that is of the West's newsletters. So our newsletters are unique in the sense that we round up news and jobs from specific industry sectors and put those all together in an email that we send out every other week. They're very specific and very segmented because we know that's what you guys want to see. We pride ourselves on sending really good emails, and these are definitely that. Trust me, they will liven up your inbox in the best way possible. I'm going to quickly break down all 4 of those. So every other Tuesday, we send out our marketing and communications newsletter. This is what keeps you up to date on all of the headlines across the world's marketing and communications realms, like what's going on with TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever it may be. Marketing wins specifically for agriculture, and then a few marketing and communications jobs that you can find on Of the West. Then every other Wednesday, we send out our livestock newsletter. It focuses on everything happening in the cattle and sheep industries and all of the best jobs in those sectors of the industry. The Tuesday that alternates our marketing newsletter, we send out Western Sports and Equine, which shares more about what's happening across Western sports, Western lifestyle, and equine news, as well as results from the rodeo arena, the show pen, and of course, jobs in those sectors that you can find on Of the West. And then finally, we have one that we call Changemakers. This one gets sent out on the first Friday of every month, and it contains top leadership tips, personal development tips, and what's happening in the world of business as it applies to ag and Western. This one also includes more of those mid to high level positions that are posted on the platform. All of these are quick hits. We basically take the headlines of the best news, bring it all together, and then if you want to read more on that specific topic, you can click out to wherever that original article came from, because we know that those awesome industry news sites that we have, they want and they need your web traffic, and we want to send you there. So people's love of these newsletters runs deep. We usually get some kind of message about them on a weekly basis. You can sign up for any one of those or as many as you want with the link in our show notes. Trust me, you guys will not regret it. It is about to be the best thing that's ever happened to your inbox. Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders of the West. Let me tell you guys, you are in for a treat today. But before I tell you exactly why that is, I want to paint you guys a picture of our guest, the one and only Jeanne Carver. So Jeanne is very well known on the sheep side of the industry. She and her late husband, Dan, started Imperial Stock Ranch, and they also are the brains behind Shaniko Wool Company. And when I first sat down with Jeanne in October, we talked all about Imperial Stock Ranch and the history of their operation and their regenerative practices and the very difficult decision that they were faced with, which then led them to create Shaniko Wool Company, and how now that decision has just paid off tenfold with not only incorporating other sheep ranchers into the fold of that company, but also just having career highlights like having their wool chosen by Ralph Lauren to be the fabric that the U.S. Olympic team blazers were made out of, first in 2014 for the Sochi Russia Games, and now in every Winter Games since then. And then for the first time ever, wool was worn in the Summer Games this past summer in the Paris Olympics. Again, Shaniko Wool Company wool. So as I mentioned, we sat down for that first episode. We chatted for an hour. And we really didn't even cover all there is to cover with Jeanne, just because she is somebody who is so incredibly passionate about the industry. So I asked if we could record a second episode. So today you guys will be hearing part 1 of a 2-part episode with Jeanne Carver. So obviously episode 1 is going to air today, and then episode 2 is going to air next week. You guys, I know I say this all the time. Every episode is my favorite episode, but this will absolutely go down as one of the most memorable episodes that I have ever had the privilege to interview, just because of Jeannie's passion. I am absolutely blown away by her. I have never met her in person, and I can tell you I absolutely look up to her. She is now on my list of women who inspire me, and the work that they are doing, not just for their operation, but for the future of agriculture, which we will really dig into in next week's episode, is absolutely unparalleled. So you guys are in for an absolute treat today. Here we go. Welcome to the show, Jeanne Carver. Oh, you guys, this is going to be a really exciting conversation. Jeanne, I am so thankful to have you here today. Thank you for saying yes to this. You are somebody who I would say multi-passionate. You are passionate about the sheep industry. You are passionate about responsible grazing. You are very passionate about the positive impact that the industry has on the environment. And we are really going to dive into all of that today. But to start things out, we want to learn more about you. Where did you grow up? Have you always been involved in agriculture? How did you meet your late husband? And really, how did you become such a leader in the sheep industry, not just here in America, but worldwide?
Well, that's a lot of questions in one. So thank you for inviting me. No, I have not always been in agriculture, but I've always had horses, if that counts, and been passionate about remote areas. My father was a road builder. And back in the day, a long time ago, these were small contracts, usually opening up country, building roads into logging areas in the Northwest, access roads along rivers, that kind of primary road building, I would say. So we moved all over the Northwest when I was a kid. I couldn't tell you the sequences of schools I went to, but everywhere we went, my poor parents, we brought the horses along because I was relentless in my request to have horses. And all the time, they were my friends and my companions as we moved. And we never lived in a town. In fact, the first time I ever lived in a town was when I went to college. I'd never had the experience of living in a town before. So we lived essentially camped wherever Dad was building roads, and the horses were with me, and they were my constant companions. And those were my friendships, were the animals. So I'll just say that life brought us to this part of the country where I am today in North Central Oregon. My father got a 2-year contract to build a road along the Deschutes River in North Central Oregon. And so we landed here, and I ended up going to high school and graduating from high school here, South Wasco County Union High School, one of those small high schools that people come from all the neighboring area and small communities. And when I left here to go to college, I thought to myself, I will never see that town again. Wouldn't know that many years later I would be back. So I went off to college where I was a double major and also did 2 sports year round. And that led me into my first career in college athletics. And for almost 20 years, I was an educator and a coach at the Division I level. And then my sister, who had married her high school sweetheart, who was a 5th-generation ranching family in this area, she ultimately introduced me to my husband, Dan. And you just don't plan your life. You sort of go where life takes you. But in committing my life to Dan, I came home to my roots here. And that's how I got here. And, it's a testimony to the fact that we don't ever know really what path our life will take. But Dan and I shared an awful lot in common, are passionate about the wilderness and natural resources and being out in it. That's where we come to life, is out there. He always said if we went up on top at night and we could see any lights, we needed to move further out. He was a great guy, and he was able to live his dream of ranching in the Oregon desert. And that was when he was able to buy into this operation in the 1980s. So from the first time I ever met him, he spoke about seeing the land win. Anyone who ever visited with Dan for very long would probably have heard him talk about that. And when he had the chance to manage a large chunk of it, like we do here, then the health of natural resources became his number one focus. And the grazing animals and the farming activities had to achieve that while returning an income. So that's how I got here. Dan was, he was an engineer by education as well as business. He was degreed in business and engineering. And so he was a systems thinker, and everything had to pencil. Those are two good underlying philosophies, right? And he always took the long view. So that's how I came to be with Dan and to be his partner and everything we've done since. And I don't know if you want me to carry on or you want to jump to another question, but I will say that by 1989, when Dan came here to take over, own and operate this ranching operation, we're about 50 square miles or more than 30,000 acres of private deeded land in one contiguous piece today. And it's a very historic ranch that's been going since 1871. And it has a great, rich history, including the headquarters complex, which all the significant structures and buildings from its beginning in the 1870s are still here and still in use, where our headquarters is a National Historic District. I believe it's still the only one in Oregon that's operating with that designation. But by 1989, when he came here, he reached to all the resources he could to help him. That's our Natural Resource Conservation Service, Soil and Water Conservation District, Extension. He reached to other resources to help him analyze this ranching operation and come up with a plan to ensure its future by putting the health of natural resources as the focus. He knew instinctively that the healthier the resource, the healthier your harvest will be, and therefore the healthier your bottom line, which is the key to ensuring the future for next generations. So by 1989, they had that plan together after a long time of evaluating and placing monitoring sites down, which we're still using. So for all these years, but it was called our Conservation Management Plan, and it has guided our work since. The other thing that was happening about the same time is in 1990, our Fish and Wildlife Agency, who monitors species and works with us cooperatively with landowners, had reported that only 2 salmon had come home to spawn in Buck Hollow Creek. Now, we're the birthplace of 2 creeks. One of those is Buck Hollow. And we have like the first 15 miles of it. So when they reported about the time that Dan was trying to manage this piece of land in a way that would see it win, we had this piece of information that only 2 salmon had come home. And historically, this was an incredible fisheries. And of course, we all know the salmon story. We're all in, the Northwest, the West, where, they lay their eggs here at the beginning of creeks, high in the headlands. And those little fish swim down the creek into a bigger creek and eventually a bigger and into the river. And in this case, the Deschutes River. Buck Hollow is a major tributary to the lower Deschutes River system. And then down the Deschutes River to the mighty Columbia, where they go out to the mouth to the Pacific to live their lives. And then, miracle of miracles, they know they must come home before they die. And they find the mouth of the Columbia. And through the estuary, they come and up the river. Think of all the challenges, not only in the ocean, but coming home. Dams and fishermen and predators and all the things that they must overcome to come home. And they come up the Columbia, they find the mouth of the Deschutes, up the Deschutes, they find the mouth of Buck Hollow Creek, and finally they're home to this place where we live to spawn and die. I mean, you talk about nature and the interconnected systems. So Dan and we heard that and said, wow, what has our part been? What have we done that might have affected the habitat for these fish and their survival? Because this is a big wake-up call to humans. Salmon are perhaps one of the greatest indicator species of the health of a system. And of course, our survival depends on the health of these systems and their continued ability to provide food and fiber, right? Sustenance, clothing, and shelter for humans. So that was a motivation. Dan became a leading voice in getting the entire basin, all the landowners and agency partners together to see if in our lifetime we could make a difference. We didn't know if we could, But he began executing on that conservation management plan and in cooperation, a collaborative project called the Buck Hollow Watershed Project to see if we couldn't affect the salmon run. I'll just tell you now that within 20 years, by 2010, we had hundreds and eventually thousands of salmon coming home to Buck Hollow Creek. It's an incredible story of a mindset shift, a change in how we operated, but more than that, a collaborative effort to make a difference for all of us.
Well, you absolutely just set the stage for today's conversation. The first thing that I want to mention is if anybody listening to this thinks that their life is tough, think about the life of a salmon. If you think you have it hard, no. A salmon has it 10 times harder than you do. You obviously illustrated that so well of the journey that fish takes, but the things that they persevere through is absolutely phenomenal. But I do want to ask, what sports did you play in college?
Volleyball. I was a setter, and track and field. And this is interesting. I was a hurdler. And if there's one thing I've faced in value-added agriculture, it's hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, obstacles, which I guess I'm wired and happen to motivate me. So I've said that competing at the national level as a hurdler in track and field, the training that it takes to be competitive at that level almost prepared me for the challenges of value-added agriculture. Almost, not quite. This is a lot harder.
For the hurdles of raising sheep and all that goes with it. Holy cow. You might have set yourself up for that. I think you could be then to blame for all the hurdles.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you touched on a lot of things about just the incredible thought that you guys have been. You've always been on the forefront of thinking about things that are now in 2024, right? Things that we're all doing. But in the late 80s, that wasn't necessarily the case at the time when you and Dan were putting together your conservation management plan. And, you always have been very cutting edge in that. But in addition to running Imperial Stock Ranch, which you had mentioned has been around since the 1880s, has it always been sheep-oriented?
1870s. 1871 is when it was established as a homestead claim by a young man who was actually born in an ox cart on the Oregon Trail in 1852. As they came west, they came to the promised land out west, right? And they went right through this country, which is pretty marginal, to west of the Cascade Mountains, where the land was very fertile, was lots of rain, soil was deep. And he grew up. And of course, back then, and many of your listeners are going to relate to this, we used to all be connected to producing our food and clothing and shelter. We used to all be connected all over the world. Human communities have been. And you worked locally, regionally, and certainly domestically, right? It's not true today. But so he grew up seeing the land fenced and farmed and become overpopulated. And as a young man, he dreamed of being a stockman, not a farmer. Although he was raised with those skills. Everybody had some hogs and chickens and a milk cow and some beef, and they farmed, right? And so when he was 19 with this dream of being a stockman, there was also the Homestead Act promising free land for those who could prove up. So he came east of the mountains into the high desert, semi-arid interior country, which many folks in the West can relate to. And he filed on his first 160-acre homestead claim in 1871. He set up his first home was in a cave in the creek bank 2 miles north of me. We still pick apples off the trees down there. Big spring there called Homestead Spring. And he lived in the cave in the creek bank, hung a door over it. They were called dugouts. And that's where he started his ranching operation. And he knew in this high, cold climate, and of course, natural fibers were everything in terms of clothing us. And wool itself has been the core fiber clothing humankind for more than 10,000 years. For a lot of reasons, it's truly a miracle fiber. It's the original performance fiber. And of course, people are coming back to it in a big way now because we've realized that our synthetics and our oil-based fibers and plastics are having all their own side effects, okay, and fallout. So Richard Hinton, in the early 1870s, he did several really key things. He knew this was the right climate to raise fine wools, so he brought in sheep right away. He also brought cattle, and he started cutting hay in the sub-irrigated meadow bottoms up and down the creeks for miles, and he cleared the rocks in this basalt country with not very deep soil, but he cleared the rocks and with a horse and a plow established all the farm fields we still farm today up on top. It's dry land farming, no irrigation. You work with what nature gives you. And we farm about 4,000 acres of dry land crop ground, and he built every one of those fields with a horse and a plow. We still benefit from that today. So he established grain and hay production, sheep and cattle production, all four in the early 1870s, and those have been continuous throughout this ranch's history. Diversity.
For over 150 years.
150, more than 150 years. Yeah. So in the early years, sheep were the biggest single production area in the early history of this ranch. Clear up until about the 1960s, sheep were the largest focus, but you have to realize, wool was huge. And during World War I and II, wool clothed our troops, clothed all of us. And synthetics didn't come to be until following those wars. So wool was worth a lot more then than it is now.
Absolutely. Okay, so on that note of wool being worth less now than it was in the past, you and your late husband, Dan, were faced with that issue of your own, and you crafted and created a really interesting solution from that. Can you kind of tell people that story and how you guys have created your other business venture?
Yeah, I will. What people can hear in our story is the logical path that we followed. Truly, it's been a logical path. Common sense has driven it all. And it's been based on the story of natural resources. It's been based on the sunlight story, the conversion of, we have seeds and soil and water and plants. And those plants magically convert the sunlight energy through that photosynthesis cycle into protein that's usable for us. The grazing animals are a key to the health of the landscapes, all plant communities. They're not here by accident. They bite plants and stimulate those plants to grow. So it's like taking care of your lawn, right? It needs stimulus. And that's what grazing animals do. So they bite those plants, which stimulates root development, biomass above and below ground, seed head production, and they convert that vegetable protein into the things that have given us life. Meat, the skins of those animals, and the fiber that they grow. So sheep, in and of itself, plus water equals life to man, because it gives us the food, it gives us the fiber to clothe us, and it gives us those skins were our early shelters, right? So they're everything in one. Our focus and our work all through the 90s was implementing these changes to help the land win. So we changed up the grazing program, became much more intensely managed, strategically located salt and mineral supplements, created capturing, storing, and holding and safely releasing what nature gives us because we're not irrigated. Dan created about 150 off-stream water developments, sediment catch basins, and spring developments, high in the headlands, so that your grazing animals and wildlife could get a drink near where the good grass is that has high protein content. They didn't have to walk for a long ways to go to the creek. They stayed away from the creek. We only put them along the creeks in the winter when everything's dormant, and they'd rather be up high where the sun hits them, right? It was a whole change in the grazing management. And following that, in 1996, he converted all those thousands of acres of dry land farm ground, which had been farmed in the traditional summer fallow method, where you got a crop one year and left it fallow the next. Then you went over it and over it and over it, controlling the weeds, right? Which disturbed it, which evaporated your moisture. It was left open to erosion. And he said, we're never going to do that again. So he parked the plow in 96. and said, we'll never plow the land again. And he shifted to no-till. Today, they will pay you to shift. But he did it, all that time, 20 years early. And in doing so, and then using livestock to graze the crop residue, prepare the soil for the seed to come in behind that, and putting it in crop every year, again, it's no irrigation. We kept the land covered all the time and eliminated erosion. Let the animals put all that residue that they didn't eat in contact and essentially mulch it into the soil. And so we started building soil instead of losing soil, which, by the way, taking away the erosion improved the habitat in the creeks because they were being silted in with all this runoff. So that stopped high in the headlands of the creeks. So that was our work, all right? This changing up to create a giant sponge on the land, hold our moisture that we got from nature, and use the livestock in a way that would benefit the whole of the earth. And what we saw was a lot of incredible positive things, but you asked me about the market. So I guess I'll go to that because there's a whole list of what we saw because of those changes in management practices. There's about 15 things that happened. And that all speaks to your bottom line and the health of the land. But that was our work. And then 1999 happened. It's significant because we had been selling our wool to the same company for 100 years. 100 years. A relationship to a company who always takes your wool for 100 years. And in the spring of 99, we sheared the sheep. We had it all baled and we called up our longtime wool buyer and said, how's it going on, in your part of the country? And by the way, what's the price this year? We're ready to haul wool. What's the price? Because in agriculture, we're typically price takers, not price makers. But the answer we got was one we were not prepared for. We were stunned. And it's the day that offshoring arrived on our doorstep. The answer was, we're really sorry, folks. We're not even going to buy it. We're closing our processing here and going offshore like everybody else. There was a massive exodus from the United States of manufacturing our clothing and textiles that began in the 80s and was going strong all through the 90s. And it landed on our doorstep that spring day in 99. In the years 1996 to 2000, just that 4-year period, 26,000 sheep producers in the United States went out of the sheep business, largely following the demise of our textile industry because there was no real interest in the fiber. And we had also had a consolidation in the food sector with one real buyer left for lamb in all of Western America. We have an urban population that does not support predator control. That's who votes and controls the vote and the policy. And so we were losing 40% of the lamb crop by 99 to predation. We had a very poor price and only one option for lamb, and we could not sell wool. And my husband looked at me and said, well, that's it. Either we find our own markets for what the sheep give us. And by the way, I'll add this. He didn't say it that day this way, but as we went along through this challenge, it became clear to me, sheep have provided life to us for thousands of years. How do you say it doesn't matter anymore? How do you say what we've been given, the gifts of creation, don't matter anymore? Are we that arrogant? Are we that short-sighted? And so he said, find a way. And that became my new task. Dan's the visionary and the idea man, and I'm the worker bee. I think that happens in a lot of homes and a lot of ranch families, right? Us women are the worker bees. We execute on a lot of great ideas. And so that was my task, was to find a new way. I began the work. I began the work on the wool, and in a very quick, short order, Dan said, well, if you're going to work on it this hard, work on the meat. That's where the real money is. And so 1 year later, we put our first wool product in the marketplace and our first lamb to chefs in our region. Our nearest market was Bend, Oregon, 90 miles and 100 years away, as Dan would say, in their life. And, it's pretty fancy in Bend. It's not quite the life we live out here. And we never looked back. What I didn't know anything about any of this. I had two things going for me, which you touched on earlier. I was fiercely competitive and damn stubborn. Okay. And it's taken both of those things to persevere and not quit. But it also made me mad when people would say, oh, well, we can't make anything in America anymore. And when they would say wool has no value, you may as well dump it. Just dump it. Are you kidding me? It's the greatest fiber ever created on the planet. And it wasn't created by us. It's not humans' invention. It's someone greater than us, right? So that's what got us going down this road. Instinctively, I paired two things. I'm not a marketing person. I'm not a designer. I'm not a wool expert. I can name a whole list of things I'm not. But I was logical. Common sense was to pair our deep history, this, 153 years this year of heritage on this ranch, still bringing the timeless things that humans need to survive. Our work is timeless. Unfortunately, in today's world and culture, we're largely forgotten, right? So what we do is timeless, but it's forgotten. And so I paired our history and I paired the story because by 2000, when the first products went out there, we were a decade into this change in managing for the health of natural resources as our number one focus. So I paired by then we were calling it sustainability. We've lived through the conservation era, then into sustainability. Today it's regenerative. I don't care what name you give it. It's the timeless practices of growing food and fiber and ensuring that this land can continue to do that. That's what it is. And so I instinctively paired those two things with our product when we went to the market. I told our sunlight story. I told the salmon story, and it resonated with authenticity. I didn't know I was building a brand. Didn't set out to build a brand. I didn't know I was building a yarn, textile, or fashion company, nor a food company, but we did. I just was trying to sell what we were harvesting so we could keep going on. It's that simple. And we never looked back. That's what happened.
And you've done a fabulous job. I will say, I always admire people who can really create a revenue opportunity from what others would see as a roadblock or a hurdle or a setback of some kind. And I really do believe that good things are born from the need to take risk. And that's not necessarily something that's easy for all of us. You said that you are fiercely competitive and you are damn stubborn. Have you always been a risk taker?
I don't know how to answer that question. I was very small. I was 5'2.5" at my tallest, and I was a hurdler at the Division I NCAA level. So if that tells you anything, I was the shortest hurdler on the starting line of the national finals. Okay. So I guess I was a risk taker. When I was in 5th and 6th grade, they let me run up with the older kids, right? Maybe because you're small, you always have to prove yourself. So if you're unloading groceries when you've been to town with the family, I would try to take the biggest box to prove I could, right? So I guess so. When you had young horses and the first one that's going to mount after the initial, conditioning and training, I wanted to be the first one on. I want on. Let me on him. So I guess that's part of my nature. Yeah.
Maybe you're a risk taker or maybe you're just fearless. But either way, it definitely has proven its worth. There's no denying that. So obviously you told the story of the 1999 and kind of how the company was created, but where has it gone since then?
Wow. Yes. Well, you never know what life will bring. You don't know. You just keep your head down, focus on the work in front of you, and carry on. Right? And so I was doing exactly that with the wool marketing, the meat marketing, selling our lamb to chefs in Bend, eventually put us into my My single day delivery route was into Bend to drop to the restaurants, over the mountain to Portland, more restaurants, down the Columbia Gorge to the Hood River, White Salmon area. This is a high recreation tourism area, and home to the ranch. It was a 15-hour delivery route. I started running that and I was driving it once a week for years. Okay. Every week touching our family. They became part of our family, these chefs, these restaurant customers and restaurant owners. And then all the private people that would meet me in the parking lots and pick up their locker lamb and beef. So it pulled our beef in as well as our lamb. And this was a going thing. And the wool, of course, I used to say to Dan, if only somebody would come down this dirt road and see who we are and what we do and why it matters, it can make all the difference. Because I'm a voice from the wilderness, kind of telling people that this is grown in America, made in America, but price-wise, we couldn't compete head-to-head with the imported Chinese, Asian-made, products. So we were a little more expensive. And, customers have a choke level, of what they can pay. Anyway, I used to say, if only somebody who had the power to influence others. Well, that happened 13 years down this road in the summer of 2012. That summer, we were in harvest. The Summer Olympics were going on in London. And we came in for lunch one day, and there were 15 phone messages. I made Dan his lunch. He went to his recliner. He always had lunch in his recliner. He was a man of great routine, never wavered, right? And he would watch Wall Street, watch the stock market while he ate lunch, have a nap, and then go back out the door. So I took the phone and took my lunch out on the back patio where I could not disturb him and answer all the phone messages. Every one of them was about the yarn business, my fiber business. I had yarn in hundreds of stores across America, named for our ranch. And it was amazing, right? It was an amazing way to sell your wool. It was working very well. So one of those calls, this gentleman started asking me about the yarn. And I said, which yarn store are you with? He said, I'm not with a yarn store. I'm with product development for Polo Ralph Lauren in New York. And I'm like, seriously? You're from Polo Ralph Lauren? And he said, I'm sitting right here on Madison Avenue. I said, well, that is amazing because I'm sitting out in the middle of the Oregon desert. In fact, I'm outside right now. Can you hear the sheep? And I held up the phone because there was a group of sheep in a ridge pasture right behind the headquarters. And they were shaded up midday by the spring. And so, you could hear the moms calling the babies as they find each other, right? And you could hear the ma, 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 and the ring of the bells. And I came back on. I said, did you hear them? He said, that is amazing. Because I transported him for those 10 or 15 seconds, which later I would meet him in his office in New York. And he was in this cubicle that was stacked floor to ceiling with fabric swatches and swatch books and hardly room for a computer on his desk. In this cubicle, no windows. And that's where he was working every day from. And I'm out here on this amazing, amazing landscape, surrounded by nature and animals and all of its wonders. And I had transported him just briefly into our world. And so I said, did you hear them? He said, that's amazing. I said, no, it's amazing. You're calling me. How did you find me? He told me how he found me and why he had called. They were looking for an American yarn for a special project. I sold my heart out for 45 minutes. I told him the story of sunlight and plants and sheep, grazing animals, and the history with humankind and why it matters and that we are all called to honor this, what we've been given. I mean, I shared my heart and this life with this gentleman in New York. And the next day, he wanted samples as soon as possible. Well, people in town don't realize that we can't do next day shipping out here. I took most of my day to drive to town the next day where you could get next day shipping and drive home so he could get yarns in hand as soon as possible. That was the first of many times I've done that for them, by the way. So this proved to be the voice who had the power to influence others. So every weekday for the next month, that gentleman called me. His name is Robert. He's my guy in New York, okay, to this day. And he called me every day asking more questions, and I would answer him, and we would visit. And a month later on a Thursday, this is now September of 2012. And he called me on a Thursday. Hi, this is Robert. And he always talked really fast. I'm like, hi, Robert. How's it going? He said, are you going to be home next Tuesday? Next Tuesday? I said, yes, I'm going to be here. Why do you ask? He says, our design team would like to come out. And I'm thinking, here from New York, they're coming out here? You know, we're talking dirt roads and there's no deli down the street. So my immediate thought was, oh my goodness, what will I wear? And second, what will I feed them? Because you feed everybody that comes here. You're too far from town, right? You cook and you feed. So anyway, the next Tuesday they were here and we gave the tour that we give to everyone. It starts with the land. So we met them on the dirt road and we spent the next few hours telling this design team the story of sunlight and salmon and how grazing animals are critical to their habitat, right? How grazing animals can actually bring back fish and the no-till farming and, you know, stopping erosion. We told the story of agriculture. And then we walked them through all our historic buildings and then we fed them. And it was all food from here. And following lunch, then we went to the textiles. And here we are. Now they're clutching these skeins of beautiful yarn, which is harvested sunlight, converted by grazing animals to wool, harvested by us and converted to these beautiful yarns here in America and then on into fabrics and wearable treasures. We showed them the whole story and they were clutching the yarn. And it was that day was the first time that I believed maybe this could actually happen. Maybe actually someone like Ralph Lauren would want our wool. Because, you know, all of our life up to them, we were too removed from that supply chain. We were disconnected like everybody else from a truly local supply chain like we historically had as humans, where we grow and convert our own food, our own grains into flour and bread. You know, we're all still pretty removed from that, even those of us in agriculture. So 6 months later, I got the biggest yarn order of my life up until then. That was Christmas of 12. And then in the spring, we found out what it was for. And we signed an NDA. And they told us that it was going to be for the Winter Olympic uniforms for the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia, 2014 for Team USA. And we were just like, really? But see, you know, even then it doesn't really, you don't really get it. You don't really get it because that is kind of a world away from you. But I tell you, when I got it was when the opening ceremonies happened. And there it was on television. And actually, they launched their PR campaign around their the first ever Made in America Team USA uniforms, launched at the end of October 2013, 100 days before the 14 Olympics opened. And about 30,000, they named us and they came and they made a film about us and they told our story to the world. That's the power your customer has. Whether it's a food company and a food brand or a chef or a fashion company, they can make a difference in our life as agriculture, as the farmers and ranchers. They help influence the culture to support us, to buy our harvest and tell our stories, you know? And that's what happened. They told our story, named us that day in late October, and I got about 30,000 emails into my inbox. It paralyzes you. It was kind of the end of me doing my own social networking. I couldn't face it. It's too big. But it was an incredible thing that they did to source our yarns, to make the uniforms here, and to tell our story. It changed our life. It changed our life. And it brought many others.
And since then, you correct me if I'm wrong, your wool has been in every Olympic since then. Is that right?
Every Winter Olympics. And then for the first time this summer in Paris, it was that beautiful opening ceremony blazer that Team USA wore was made with 100% wool from Shaniko Wool Company. Yes. So we did the first Summer Olympics. This just happened in Paris this year, which was terrific for them to put wool, this amazing miracle fiber, on stage in that kind of a viewership in the summer games.
In what would traditionally be like an off season.
Well, normally you think, cold weather, wool for cold weather wear, right? The truth is, wool is a year-round fiber. It does so many things besides keep you warm. We could go into the whole list of things, but, very lightweight, finely spun and knit, all your base layers, the best base layers in the world. And next to skin layers year-round are made of wool because of the properties of wool to insulate, conduct heat, move moisture, and protect us as our human skin and systems. So it's been amazing. Yeah.
That is absolutely fabulous. I feel like we could continue talking for hours. I do want to ask you our rapid fire round questions, and I want to ask you some wool related fashion questions. And I absolutely want to have you back in the future where we can talk more about just the regenerative side of things and net positive impact to nature, which you guys have actual empirical data around, which I think is huge. But of course, woman to woman, we have to talk fashion because you are incredibly fashionable. Give us the details on wearing wool.
The details on wearing wool, you can wear it for every event, any occasion, any season, because wool can be crafted into an amazing array of products. You have to fit the right quality of wool to the right use. But I recently attended a very gorgeous summer wedding outdoors. In fact, it's the only wedding I've ever been to where they had a mechanical bull at the reception, which was really fun. I did not ride it because I was dressed in my gorgeous Janessa Leone knit dress that was more tightly knit through the bodice, but then sheer all the way to the top of your boots. It was a gorgeous, very finely spun knit dress that very high style, very high style. That's terrific. I wore a different style dress knit from the wool last fall in London when the new book on the life and legacy of King Charles as he turned 75. I was at the party of the book launch because our story is featured in that book on his life and legacy. And I had a New York designer design and knit a gorgeous dress out of Shaniko wool yarn that I wore for that, along with she did a full-length felted wool fabric coat that went with it that was completely bordered in felted and antique lace. So you have those kinds of applications, whether you need something warmer or something for a 100-degree day outdoors, you can still be fashionable. But I also live in 100% wool layers year-round that are outdoor recreation oriented, underneath your coats for winter work on the ranch, all our wool socks, sweaters, beanies. Wool can handle every season, every occasion. Truly it can.
Is this the dress that you wore this summer to a wedding? I believe, I may be mistaken on this, but I think it was the next day that I had called you and you were washing this dress by hand in the sink because the tag said dry clean only, and you were going to call the designer and say, X that, you can hand wash it, and it turns out beautifully because that's just how high quality the wool is.
You're absolutely correct. I was hand washing that dress and it turned out gorgeous. And I wash all my wools, but you need to be careful. But the sheep live outdoors. They get snowed on, rained on. They lay down in it. Wool is durable. It's forever. And when you are done using it, repairing it, repurposing it, handing it down, it finally biodegrades.
There really is no better beginning to end story than something like a product like that, especially just coming from you with your passion. Okay, let's go to our rapid fire round. So these are the questions that we ask all of our guests. The first one is, what is the best piece of business or personal advice that you have ever been given?
Well, I would say it came from my husband, Dan, whom I still miss every day of my life. And that was, he used to say, because we were always faced with many things. And he would say, it's easier to say no than it is yes. Sometimes you just have to say yes and then make it be the right decision. Make it be the right decision.
That is great advice. Okay, this question is similar but different. If you could give people any words of wisdom and you knew that they would take it to heart, what would it be? So it's the advice that you would give somebody else.
Well, I try not to give anyone advice. Let me just say that first. But if somebody were to ask me, I would say, focus on your own work, not the work of others or anyone around you. It goes back to athletics, you know. Focus on your own lane, because that's the only thing you could control. It's too easy to get distracted, focus on what others are doing, but focus on your own work and deliver. That would be my advice.
The only person you're competing against is you.
Ultimately, that's true.
Okay, if you could go to dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick?
I would just love to go to dinner. I get tired of cooking, you know, when you live far from town. You don't have that option.
I relate to that.
For me, again, I'm going to go back to Dan. I would go to dinner with Dan. You know, I talked too much, I guess. We didn't get into the real victory, the greatest victory we've ever delivered. We didn't get into that. And that's the impact data that's been measured on the ranching operations that are part of Shaniko Wool Company. But I would go to dinner with Dan because he didn't live to see the results of having his vision and his changes and his work measured, to see the actual measured data on his life's work. And I would want to share that with him. That would be the greatest thing. And he would be so pleased. So it would be Dan. I would go with him.
That answer gave me chills because it is. That was something we wanted to talk about today, but we're kind of tight on time now. But we have to have you back to go in further than that, because not only does it talk more about the work that you guys are doing, but it really puts data behind the importance of agriculture and responsible practices. And it is the industry's life work that proves our industries are still needed today.
Yes, it's perhaps our greatest deliverable, but it hasn't been measured and we're not given credit for it. And the only way we'll get that recognition of the real underlying value of what we do is to have the data that documents it, to show what our net impact is, what our environmental footprint is, particularly with family agriculture.
Okay. After this, we're going to schedule another episode to just dive in solely to that. Okay. 2 more questions for you. What is one quote that you lead your life by?
Well, you know, you keep asking me these things, but I'm not typical, I don't think, because I don't read books. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't watch movies. I don't have favorites. But quotes, gosh, you know, there was one that has always stuck with me that I've loved. And I would say it kind of fits. I don't know where it came from, so I can't even tell you whose it was. But it was on the refrigerator for decades. Great place to have it, right? It's a good life if you don't weaken.
Oh, that is one everybody needs to hear.
Life is not easy.
No.
You have to accept that it's going to be hard. And maybe by doing that, it gets a little easy just because of that. But you can't weaken. So that's the one that sticks with me.
Okay, final question for you. Do you have, which I know you said you don't read, you don't listen to podcasts, you don't have services or programs, but what is a life hack maybe that you want to share with other people? What is a trick? Because I know living rural like you do, not being anywhere near a grocery store or a restaurant, like you have to have some tricks that the rest of us rural individuals need to know about.
Open your eyes and look out. I guess if there's one thing, that go outside and look at the horizon. Just go outside and put your eyes on the horizon. If you need inspiration, that'll do it. You know, I remember public television was here for like 7 days doing a documentary on us. some years ago. And one of the things that the producer kept saying was, Jeanne, where does all your energy come from? Of course, that was years ago. I've crossed the big 7-0. I'm in my 70s now. Where does your energy come from? And I'm like, it's not hard because I literally open my eyes every morning. I sit up in the bed onto your feet and I'm looking out at this amazing landscape. How can you not be filled when that's what you see? How can you not be filled when the first thing in your vision every day is the land? How can that not fill you? So, you got to put your eyes on the horizon. When you do that, it's a reminder of we're grounded in nature. That's a blessing in life. That's a blessing. I was in Los Angeles last week speaking at the first Regenerative Sourcing Forum. Invitation only. I was invited by the CEO of a really leading fashion brand. It would be very difficult for me personally to live in an environment where when I open my eyes and looked out, all I see is development. All I see are buildings and concrete. You see, that would affect my spirit personally. So I'm in awe of the people that can maintain a positive outlook and a great spirit and the work in front of them. But we're all suited to different environments. But for me, it's put your eyes on the land, get outside and look at the horizon because it's uplifting. It's all you need.
That is the perfect advice and way to end today's conversation. Jeanne, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I know that everybody listening has gotten just as much joy and vigor from this episode and this conversation with you as I have. For those of you guys who are listening to this, please do make sure to share your favorite piece of advice or your favorite piece of today's conversation. Share that over on Instagram and make sure to tag us so that we can continue to share those as well. I know today's episode also needs to be shared with other people. So if you enjoyed it just as much as I did, please feel free to share this with your friends and family and anybody else who maybe needs to hear this wise woman's words of wisdom. Thank you guys for listening. Jeanne, it was fabulous to have you here. You guys know that you will catch us back here next week with another episode of Leaders of the West. Until then, thank you so much and have a fabulous rest of your week.
If you loved this episode, do us a favor and share it with someone else who might find just as much value in it as you did. We're on a mission to continue to grow and strengthen the future of agriculture and Western industries, and you spreading the word helps us make more of a positive impact. It also makes a big difference when you take a minute to go rate and review the show. We can't thank you enough for listening, for sharing, and for loving Ag and Western as much as we do. We'll see you back here for our next episode.